Today on the 10-12 podcast, Marshall Scott of Pistol's Firing Blog joins us to recap Week 4 in the Big 12, including 0-4 for the Newcomers. Kansas and Kansas State might be our final hope. What's going on with Oklahoma State's NIL collective? Baylor is down bad. The actual sicko game of the week for Week 4, and the games we're most looking forward to this coming Saturday. Welcome to the 10-12, the podcast that covers all 14 teams in the Big 12 Conference, plus Colorado, Arizona, Arizona State, and Utah. We are the flagship show of the 10-12 Network. Find every show on the network at 1012network.com, TEN, the number 12, the word network. And we are partners with Sports Social, Europe's biggest sports podcast network. I am your host, Philip Slavin. Thank you for joining us on this Monday. We've got a little bit of a different show today. Unfortunately, our good friends Andy and JSJ, Jamie Sire Johnson, could not join us today. Both had other things going on. So we've got a fill-in. I'm very excited to have here joining us on the show today. He is Marshall Scott. He is the owner of Pistol's Firing Blog, one of the best original school-focused sites for the Big 12. Marshall, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Absolutely. I have been, as an Oklahoma State fan, aside from my Big 12 fandom, been a long-time reader, back to the early days. So it's very good to have you on the show today, man.
I appreciate that. I appreciate your support, and I appreciate you offering this up to me. This seems like a lot of fun.
Yeah, we'll get to some Oklahoma State. It's not like OSU's got, is interesting or anything or worth having to spend some time on today. So your insight will be invaluable. Let's just start with the weekend kind of as a whole. Number one, congratulations. All four newcomers have now officially played their first game as a Big 12 conference member, a first conference game, and they're all 0-4. So let's all be worried and say this was terrible. These were the worst schools to bring on. They were not prepared. They're all going to have terrible seasons. They're no good. The Big 12 made. I'm kidding. Obviously, this is not shocking that they all started 0-4. And it's not like any of them got a cakewalk, right? So like TCU beat Houston soundly. UCF was in a fairly competitive game with Kansas State until the second half. BYU, similarly, competitive game with Kansas until the second half. And Cincinnati played Oklahoma at home. I guess you could call it competitive when they went up 3-0, and then Oklahoma took over on offense. Marshall, the newcomers are 0-4 to start things off. I mean, I don't really know that I have any other takeaway from this other than, welcome to the Big 12.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was just based on some of the matchups, somewhat expected. UCF's probably the best of the bunch so far, and they get the defending Big 12 champion Kansas State. OU's obviously looked a lot better this year. Cincinnati gets that rough draw. BYU and Kansas, that a couple of years ago would have been all BYU, but Kansas is obviously taking a lot of steps forward. So I don't think any of the alarm bells should be ringing quite yet. But definitely a welcome to the Power 5 type of moment in that, game by game, the competition level is going to be, drastically up from the American Conference.
Yeah, it's again, it's okay. It's not the end of the world. I meant to do this beforehand, but you can come up with ideas and you go to look on them on your phone, and then one of the three children needs something, and then the next of the three children needs something, and then the next of the three children needs something. And I was trying to find out how long it took TCU and West Virginia to win their first game of their first season of the Big 12. Let's see. Ooh, I'm gonna do a little. We're just gonna do this live on the air because
we'll do it live.
We'll do it live. We'll do it live. Let's see. For TCU, I do have notes. It was game 2. They lost to Iowa State in their. Nope, just kidding. They played Kansas in week 2 and won. Well, that was Kansas in 2012. That's not super surprising. Let's see. For West Virginia, it was
game 1.
Game 1. Well, this didn't work at all. This did not.
Maybe the alarm bells do need to start ringing.
This completely and totally backfired. We should be very concerned about the four newcomers and the fact that they are 0-4 to start things off. We'll see how this goes moving forward. Again, I don't think it's that big of a deal. I just think it's interesting to note that not one of them has won a game so far. If you're a fan of one of those four, don't take this as an insult. It's a thing. It's a fact. It's fine. Looking at the conference now, just as a whole, now that everyone has played one conference game, everyone's got 4 games under their belt. Everyone's got a conference game. Marshall, do you think it's fair to kind of start putting a dividing line between the top half of the conference and the bottom half of the conference and feeling pretty comfortable with that? Or do you think we need to tier this out a little bit more into like 3 or 4 tiers?
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm ready. I think there's almost, unfortunately for the Big 12, because Texas and OU are leaving. I think right now it's kind of Texas and OU, and then a big clump of schools, and then at the bottom there's, unfortunately for us both being Oklahoma State guys, Oklahoma State, Iowa State, West Virginia is looking good. So West Virginia's not even down there. Maybe Baylor's down there as well. Which in 2021, if you would have said Oklahoma State and Baylor are hanging out at the bottom of the conference, I'm not sure anybody would have believed that. So I think that I think there is maybe a pretty clear dividing line, but I think that Texas and OU at this point, unfortunately for the conference, are pretty far ahead of the rest of the pack.
I would almost go so far as to say Texas is in a tier of their own.
Yeah,
like Oklahoma's look
agree
good. Texas' defense has been ridiculous. I've got some notes here in a bit when we get to it. Oklahoma, I think Oklahoma is good. I think Kansas and Kansas State are closer to Oklahoma than maybe we want to give them credit for because of how Oklahoma's looked in their 4-0 start. I think Kansas and Kansas State have played better schedules up to this point than Oklahoma has. Now, again, we've done the opponent-adjusted stuff with Oklahoma. Like, this is not a takeaway from Oklahoma. Like, this is a good team. They have done things against subpar competition that you want to see a good team do against subpar competition. But I would put Kansas and Kansas State closer to Oklahoma at this point. I think there's a big mess in the middle. I'm like West Virginia's 3-1.
Yep.
It's incredible. I'm not sure that they're necessarily good. I think they're better than we thought they would be. I also think Pitt's worse than we thought, and I think Texas Tech is an absolute mess and lost a player, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But like, I'm not going to go so far as to say like West Virginia is good. It's not a shot at West Virginia like you're 3-1. Awesome. Like the schedule now sets up. You could get to a bowl game the way it does. We could do schedule talk here in a second. But like I do think there's Texas. There's a group of 3, maybe 4 teams if we want to add a 4th one in there. Then there's a big mess in the middle, and there's a bottom of the conference that is I almost think the bottom of the Big 12 this year is the worst it's been in a while. And that's really disappointing after how good this conference was top to bottom last year and frankly the year before that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it kind of comes at a weird time where Texas, as of, recent history, has been, overhyped talent to a point. And this kind of feels like the year that they're like Texas is getting it together. And now the rest of the Big 12 looks a little suspect. So it's not only just that Texas does seem to, quote unquote, be back for the time being, but the rest of the league kind of is figuring things out, I guess you could say.
Definitely on the bottom portion of the up cycle, as we've noticed the conference needs to be on. So let's kind of break this down game by game a little bit here. Let's start in Morgantown. We talked about West Virginia a little bit. Y'all, we picked the wrong game for Sicko Game of the Week this week. It was not Oklahoma State, Iowa State like we thought it would be. It was this one, Texas Tech at West Virginia. Again, I'm giving West Virginia credit for being 3-1, and it's weird to me that they're 3-1 and Texas Tech is 1-3. We got to lead off with this. Of course, Tyler Shuck left the game with an injury. He's going to require surgery. He's probably out for the year. Texas Tech. I'm going to say this, and I'm going to say I can't entirely confirm it. Texas Tech has not made it through a season with its starting quarterback healthy since Patrick Mahomes last season. B, I'm like 90% sure they've not only lost their starting quarterback, but like lost their starting quarterback for the year at some point every season since Patrick Mahomes last season. Like, I understand quarterbacks get hurt. It's football. Injuries happen. I don't think anyone in the country has had worse quarterback injury luck than the Texas Tech Red Raiders ever since Patrick Mahomes left after 2017.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Tech is just weird this year, and kind of going on to the weirdness you brought up with that stat. But, Tech competes with Oregon, but, we just saw Oregon blast Colorado. Tech competes with Oregon, but ultimately the only team they've beaten this year is Charleston State. And even in this game against West Virginia, Tech wins the turnover battle, rushes for more yards, and loses to a team that was picked bottom of the conference. So things are just weird in Lubbock right now, I think.
I mean, things are always weird in Lubbock.
Yeah.
It's it's not just they're 1-3. As you mentioned, they're 1-3 without a win over an FBS opponent. Their average margin of defeat in these 3 losses is less than 6 points. Like it's almost excruciating at this point that they're not just 1-3, but I mean, there's no reason Texas Tech shouldn't be 4-0. I mean, like to lose the way you did at Wyoming, to lose the way you did against Oregon, frankly, to lose the way you did against West Virginia, Texas Tech probably should have been able to tie that game up. And credit to West Virginia's defense for getting the stop. I mean, there was a couple of those passes that the pass to Tharp on what I think was second or third down. That was an incredible play by the defender to get there and break that pass up. Then you had the other one that was just a little high by Baron Morton, just a little high. Probably should have been caught. Could have been the touchdown to tie things up as well there. I'll say this. Texas Tech fans are not fans of Zach Kittley at the moment. I mean, for 3 quarters, your game plan is air raid offense. It does not work. 4th quarter, you finally start to run the ball. You are running the ball very, very effectively. I mean, that's the whole reason Texas Tech was able to come back and be in that spot in the closing seconds for a chance to tie the game up. And then you have 4 shots at the end zone from the 11. Here, and what I said was this. You're sitting on the 11-yard line. You've got 2 timeouts. You've got more than 30 seconds left on the game clock. You can get a first down at the 1, and you take 4 straight shots at the end zone. And again, one was a great defensive play to break up what should have been the game-time touchdown. One was a pass that was just a little bit high. You didn't run the ball. That's the reason you even were back to be in a situation to tie this game, and you went, nah, we're taking it out of the running back's hands. Baron Morton, we want you to throw 4 straight passes. And it's one of those things where hindsight's, 2020, but I can understand why Texas Tech fans aren't thrilled with Zach Kittley and the offense through the first 4 games of the season so far.
Yeah, absolutely. And just a quick look at the box score. It's pretty obvious who Tech should have got the ball to with Taj Brooks, 25 carries, 149 yards. That's 6 yards a carry. You mentioned Tyler Shuck getting hurt. So you got Baron Morton, who Mike Gundy spoke pretty highly of last season. So, maybe with, work at reps as QB1 in the upcoming weeks, he can kind of, show his potential a little bit. But yeah, if that is, you've got this running back that's playing well, you're using your backup quarterback. It's maybe it seems too simple to just kind of give him the ball.
Yeah. As for West Virginia, like I said, 3-1. That's incredible. Like you lost the game you're supposed to lose, and now you've won 3 in a row. Like this is great. The schedule the next few weeks sets up pretty well for West Virginia. It's at TCU, at Houston, then Oklahoma State at home. Like the idea of West Virginia sitting here 5-2 through 7 weeks is very, very much in play. I know the last 5 games of the season aren't going to be easy with at UCF, BYU, at Oklahoma, Cincinnati, at Baylor. But if West Virginia bowl game is very much in play here. So I hope you didn't put any money on the under for West Virginia, because like West Virginia bowl season, Neil Brown saving his job, coming back to Morgantown for another year. Like it's not just in play. Like unless something crazy happens, like I almost think that could very much happen, because they've got enough games against teams who have not been good and are sitting at I would consider the bottom of the conference. Houston, OSU, Cincinnati, Baylor. Like bowl season's a very big possibility here.
Yeah, and that is great considering this team was picked last. I do wonder still if it's enough to save things for Neil Brown, just because that 6-win area is kind of where he's hung out in. In 2019 goes 5-7, goes 6-4, goes 6-7, goes 5-7. So it's kind of just like, does he get the credit for taking a team that was picked last and having them not finish last, having them make a bowl game? Or is it, or are West Virginia fans just going to be, oh, this is kind of the same old, same old. We're kind of in the same spot that everything's kind of been. But yeah, as you mentioned, with that schedule, they should beat Houston, they should beat Oklahoma State, and then to get bowl eligibility, you need 1 win from your last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 games, which seems very doable, especially with Baylor being that last game. Who really knows what's up with the Bears right now? So yeah, I think it's awesome. Neil Brown seems like a great dude. So that's awesome for him. It just kind of seems like if they do finish around that 6-win mark, it's going to be kind of more of the same. And I wonder if that is enough. I don't know. I'm not hanging out on West Virginia forums or anything like that, but it just kind of, I wonder if that's enough for the Mountaineer faithful to kind of get behind him again.
I'll use the word to explain why 5 or 6 wins is probably going to keep his job. Buyout.
Yeah.
Buyout
yeah.
is the And let's just remind everybody, there's a lot going on at West Virginia outside of the athletic department that would make that a difficult place to try and make a football coaching hire right now. Let's move on down to, you mentioned it off the top. If anyone had told you back in 2021 that Baylor and Oklahoma State might be the two worst teams, Houston, in the Big 12 in the 2023 season, that would be a surprising thing. Baylor, we're going to get the Texas side of this in a second. Y'all, Baylor's bad. Like, bad. Like, I understand that Shapen's not playing and the backups aren't great. I don't think they're Shapen away from winning this game or being more competitive or Baylor suddenly looking better. Like, they, in this game, were down 28-3 in the first half. Texas takes a punt, fumbles it. Baylor recovers. At the Texas 21, I know it was 4th and 8. I understand that, but it's 4th and 8. You're down 28-3, which is a score that don't tell anybody around Atlanta, and you went ahead and went for the field goal to make it 28-6, and you didn't score again. You take that, and some of the decision making it felt like in this game. Some of the kind of surrender plays. Then you take some of the comments that Dave Aranda, who I have been like very, very high on for some time. Some of the comments he made after the game, like Dave Aranda said he still believes this Baylor roster is Big 12 championship caliber. I like Aranda. Some of it feels a little bit like the things you have to say as opposed to coming out and saying like, y'all, we suck. But for a guy who's I have respected because of his kind of brutal honesty about things, either he doesn't understand what's wrong or he's just kind of doing the coaching thing. It does not feel good in Waco right now, like at all.
Yeah, absolutely. I think kind of the stat that antithesis that game is Richard Reese and Dominic Richardson combined for 9 carries and 12 rushing yards. And I know that Texas has all the athletes. Texas defense, as you mentioned at the top, is playing outstanding football. But those two guys would be who you would consider Baylor's backs coming into the year, and to get 9 carries and 12 yards out of those two, that's not going to do it. I don't know if that's an indictment on the offensive line. I don't know if that's an indictment on those two, but yeah, it's a rough spot to be in. And like I said, just imagining the falls that Baylor and Oklahoma State have had over the past 2 years is somewhat remarkable.
Yeah, 31 carries for 60 yards. Now, granted, the Sawyer Robertson sacks and lost yardage is in there, but still, just like, I never thought coming into the season, and it's still wild to me to even try and come up with the idea of like a man who coached a team to a Big 12 championship game 2 years ago might legitimately have his job on the line right now if things just keep getting worse. Like I still would feel a little bit surprised to see a move like that made, but it's not good in Waco. A lot of season left to go. We'll see kind of how that goes. All right, Texas. Like I said, Baylor, they made 6 trips to the Texas red zone on Saturday night. They played 23 plays when they were in the red zone. They gained 30 yards, kicked 2 field goals, took 2 sacks, and threw a pick. Y'all, Texas defense, we talked about it. They are good. They are so good. Texas currently ranked 2nd nationally in red zone defense. It's not just the defensive line is good. It's when you put their backs up against the wall in the red zone, good luck scoring. The defense has been phenomenal. Just absolutely fantastic. The offense has been good, inconsistent, very, very explosive, inefficient, but that defense is so good right now. It's fine. If the offense has one good 14, 17 point quarter, the Texas is probably going to win because they're going to put up enough points the rest of the game. Like you looked in this one and I was like, surely they're going to put up a ton of more points, and they didn't score in the fourth quarter, but they didn't have to. They just sat back on their defense and said, yeah, Baylor, you want to win this game. Like our offense is going to be generic and we're going to make you beat us. The Texas defense has been phenomenal through the first 4 games of the season. And Texas is going to face some better offenses in this conference. They'll do it next week against Kansas, but it's the best defense in the Big 12. It's one of the best defenses in the country, like top 5 at worst. I'm not, if you want to say 1, I'm probably not going to sit here and argue with you. Statistically, like it's right about there. It's dang good. It is finally, this is a Texas defense finally living up to like preseason expectations. In fact, I would say it's been better than advertised heading into the year so far through 4 games.
Yeah, I've was very much going into this year I'll believe it when I see it with Texas because we've heard that the Longhorns have been back for so long. Um, but this definitely seems a little different than it has in years past, and that's I think I reserve my right to if everything changes. They've got 2 games coming up that historically have as of late have been kind of coin flips with Kansas coming to town, and then obviously Oklahoma at the Cotton Bowl. So I think those are 2 huge games for the Longhorns. But then after that, it seems like they could really get rolling. The really toughest test past their next 2 games is Kansas State at the beginning of November. So it does seem like Texas is actually a real deal this year. Definitely could have said that in the Alabama game. Can say that even more now. Losing the turnover battle against Baylor, but still only giving up 6 points. Kind of like you mentioned, if that defense gets their backs up against the wall, they're going to find a way to squirm out of it. So
Again, I'm not saying Texas is going to run the table. They will have a Texas hiccup. This offense still has enough inconsistency and inefficiency to have a game where another offense kind of figures them out and puts up points on them. But the idea of, I had people I think last week being like, no, Texas is still going to lose like 2 or 3 games. I'm like, show me what they are. Tell me, play that out for me. Like, please, like it's gonna be this team, and this team. Don't just be like they're going to lose 3 games. What 3 games? Like we're past the whole like they're going to lose 3 games. They always lose some, yada, yada. We're past that. We've seen them now through 4 games in this season. And if you want to say, well, they played Rice and Wyoming and a bad Baylor team, and it's not Alabama of old, like what are they going to sit here at 10-0 and you're still going to be like, they're going to lose 3 games. They're going to find a way. Like at some point, we all just got to kind of prepare for the inevitable. Like Texas is the best team in the Big 12. This is a really, really good team. They have flaws. I'm not saying they don't. It's a really good team. Okay. Oklahoma and Cincinnati. Cincinnati's defense is good. They have scored fewer and fewer points every week of this season so far. Like I was willing to give them credit for blowing out Eastern Kentucky. I was going to give them credit for beating Pitt and putting up 27 points, but they've scored 66, then 27, then 24, and now 6. This is starting to look like the Cincinnati team I thought they were going to be at the beginning of the season. They fooled me a little with Eastern Kentucky and Pitt, which turns out Pitt isn't good. At this point now, it's a good defense. This is a good defensive team. That defensive line is really good. It gave Oklahoma some trouble. And it's an offense that's not awesome. That's just not. This is the Cincinnati team I thought we'd see. I think they're going to struggle moving forward in the schedule. I think they're going to have opportunities for wins. They get Baylor at home. They got to go to OSU. They go to Houston. Like they've got opportunities for some wins. But like I'm back on my Cincinnati's probably not very good. They're not going to go bowling. It's going to be a year 1 where it's just welcome to the Big 12.
yeah, I kind of thought this game was closer than maybe the score indicated. Um, you know, OU takes a 10-3 lead, and 2 things happen. Cincinnati throws a pick in the OU end zone, and Cincinnati misses a field goal. You just kind of wonder how different things could be had A, they not thrown a pick there, and even if they have to settle for a field goal, and then B, they make that second field goal. So I think those are kind of the 2 moments where, in a group of 5 conference, you can kind of get away with that kind of stuff. In the Big 12, points are at a premium, and you just can't make kind of those types of errors in games. So, I'd like to see where that game plays out. Had it been a little different, kind of on the Oklahoma side of things, Oklahoma's looked mortal against SMU and Cincinnati. Their 2 biggest competitions this year. And then obviously in their other games have just boat race teams. So I was, I guess, impressed with Cincinnati's defense to be able to keep the Bearcats in it. But yeah, those kind of costly mistakes. Cincinnati's just not ready and can't. They don't have that margin for error to steal something from Mike Gundy this past weekend.
It got a bit better later in the game, but Oklahoma on first down wasn't awesome, especially early on. Like at one point, they'd had second downs of 14, 10, 10, 10, 10, 9, and 11. Like they're a little bit kind of like Texas to some extent of Like, they can be explosive. I still think they're a little inefficient. And again, I want to give full check. Part of me thinks this is just credit due to Cincinnati's defensive line because it is good. Like, it is a good defensive line in the Big 12. Oklahoma is going to lose games. Oklahoma has flaws. Your points on how they looked a little bit more human against Cincinnati and SMU, I think, is fair. Some of the offensive play calling, like, has been a little bit weird too. I'm still not sure everything is, peachy keen there in Norman with everybody and noting some off-field stuff. Like, I still feel like Oklahoma's probably the second best team in the Big 12 right now. They're going to lose some games. Like, your hope at this point to me is Oklahoma ends up losing a tiebreaker to somebody else to avoid Arlington. Since we're talking Texas and Oklahoma, let's just have that conversation, Marshall, because I think this is every time I have a guest on, I want to ask him. Like, Texas is going to Arlington. Like, I don't.
Yeah.
If someone thinks they're not, like, show two teams that are better than Texas right now in the Big 12. Oklahoma's played well enough through 4 games and still has a schedule that includes Iowa State at home, Oklahoma State on the road, West Virginia at home. Like, where I go, find me 3 losses because I think that's the only way they're not going to make it to Arlington, unless it's a 2-loss team versus another 2-loss team that they happen to lose to. And I don't know who that is because my best guesses would be Kansas State. Maybe it's Kansas. We'll see. Like, is it Oklahoma? Do we just need to prepare for the nightmare scenario of Texas, Oklahoma, and Arlington in December? Or who do you see as a potential actual savior to prevent that scenario from happening?
Yeah, I think it feels weird to put hopes in KU football. But that's, OU has to go to Kansas. You mentioned, they get UCF, which if they play UCF on the road, things could get a little weird. The bounce house could get a little weird, but, they get them in Norman. So I don't necessarily see them losing that. Maybe you go to BYU, time zone, all that stuff. I think TCU has been better than I thought they would be, especially after week 1. Just with all the guys that they lost off last season's team. Then they start the year with a loss. I think I personally kind of wrote TCU off, but I think they are better than what I thought after that week 1 loss. So I think if you're a Big 12 truther, your hopes are in that October 28th game at Kansas and in that season finale in Norman against TCU. But yeah, I think there's a very real reality of Texas and OU playing for a Big 12 championship trophy that they're going to take to the SEC.
It remains an absolute disappointment and travesty that Oklahoma does not play Kansas State this season. I don't understand how that game was not put on the schedule. I don't understand why OU was allowed to avoid Kansas State. If you look at S&P Plus rankings right now, for the most part, the preseason stuff's just about wiped out of them. Once you get through week 4, Texas is number 7, Oklahoma's number 8. Next closest in the Big 12 is Kansas State at 19. Like, it does feel a little bit like, oh no, they lost to Missouri on the road. I'm like, yeah, they lost to Tulane last year. I'm not saying they're as good as last year, but like, Kansas State's going to lose games. It doesn't mean that they can't be good enough to get back to Arlington. That's why I think a lot of people had them pick number 2 in the preseason, or 3. I had them 2. I do think it's between Kansas State and Kansas, and at this point, Kansas State's just got to end up with a better record because they won't have a tiebreaker scenario to play off, and Kansas on the road. It is an interesting 3-week stretch of Texas and Red River. I don't know, because they get a week off before they play UCF and then at Kansas. So, I mean, I want to know what dirt Joe Castiglione had on the Big 12 office to get the schedule that they got, because it's absolutely a gift and atrocious that Oklahoma got the schedule. I don't understand. One thing that is not go ahead.
Yeah, you just kind of like looking down the schedule at this point, Texas really does seem like the only game that, they should lose. You can maybe point to that Kansas game, but yeah, that is a Charmin soft looking schedule.
Got to circles Kansas on the road. UCF fans are going to want to say UCF. That's fine. And then BYU on the road in November. Like, come on, Cougs. Let's see if they can pull it off. Like I said, one thing that is not a disappointment or a travesty or a tragedy is Charlie Hustle. This podcast is brought to you by our friends at Charlie Hustle Clothing Company. Charlie Hustle is a vintage-inspired clothing company based out of Kansas City that specializes in collegiate and hometown apparel. Charlie Hustle wants you to be the best dressed fan this season, so be sure to check out their wide selection of officially licensed collegiate apparel today and show off your school spirit all season long. They love the Big 12. It's why they have 13 of the current 14 Big 12 schools, and they're going to be working, and they've got one of the future ones, Colorado, and they'll be working on the rest of them. They're doing it. They put out incredible vintage college sports apparel. If you're an Oklahoma fan, a Texas fan, OSU fan, maybe you're a Baylor fan who needs to feel better, Charlie Hustle's got you. An Oklahoma State fan who needs to pick me up, Charlie Hustle's got you. They have some incredible stuff, and I want you to make sure that you're paying attention to our 10-12 network shows because the giveaways with Charlie Hustle are going to start this week. It's all going to be focused around games on the Big 12 slate each week, so make sure you're following every 10-12 network podcast on social media, Twitter, everyone's there, Instagram if they have it, so that you can be entered in to win. That's all I'm going to say. We'll have stuff on our Twitter account at 1012 network, TE in the number 12, the word network. So if you say you enter the giveaway, don't win, that's okay. You can still use the promo code 101215, TEN1215 for 15% off any non-sale items. I didn't say first purchase, I said non-sale items. That means if you want to buy something now to pick me up or to celebrate your team's big victory, you love the thing that you bought and you want to buy some for friends and family for the holidays, remember that promo code 101215, TEN1215 for 15% off all non-sale items. With more than 30 schools to choose from, they've got you covered with all of your collegiate apparel needs. So shop today at charliehustle.com. Use that promo code Charlie Hustle, vintage made fresh. All right, we saw the game between two of the teams that we hope are the saviors for the Big 12. Oklahoma and Texas, please understand, okay, I want to back up for a second because I need to talk about one thing with Texas. Texas fans are getting real weird on Twitter. I know it's been a long time since Texas has been good, but I saw a Texas fan getting mad because Baylor fans were throwing the horns down and yelling Baylor chants at the end of the game when Texas was trying to play their school song in Waco. What are you guys doing? What is with all this complaining about the way the Big 12 is tweeting us? It's not nice. It's so mean. They're so cruel to us. We're the best team in the conference and they should be kind to us. Y'all are leaving. You don't even want to be here. You're going to go to the SEC where they're going to be, frankly, even more mean to you than we are. Because we still have a little bit of you've been in this conference for a long time. We're mad you're leaving. We don't like you. And you've been bragging about, I don't know, recruiting wins and budget for the last decade because you haven't had actually wins on the field. And the one you finally have a good season on the field and y'all are just acting a little bit babies. Not all of you, but there's enough of you where it's what did you forget how to act when you're actually winning? It's a little bit Charmin soft right now, guys.
Yeah, it kind of seems like a continuation of the horns down, of a big deal getting made out of the horns down thing. But it's a lot like, you're in a relationship and you find out your significant other's, sleeping around on you, but you still have to finish out this lease or something like that. So you're still living together because you don't have any other options. So no, I'm not going to be nice to you during that time. I'm not going to particularly enjoy your company. But let's just finish this lease out, and you're going to take a hardware with you. So enjoy that, but let's just move on.
You can't believe I changed the Netflix password. I'm not going to share it with you anymore. Come on now. One other thing. Okay, we're going to talk about Kansas and BYU here for a second. BYU fans. Lance Leipold made a comment this week, and a lot of you got bent out of shape because he said that the roster at BYU is about 22 years old on average. The average age of the roster at BYU is 21.7 years old. He was not being mean. He really wasn't even off base. While there is no way to confirm this without going roster by roster and checking, I can promise you that 21.7 years old as an average age of your roster is one of the oldest rosters in college football. I'm going to go ahead and put myself out there and make that claim. It is not a slight to say BYU is an older and more mature team. It's not a slight. It's not an insult. It's not a trope. It's not to take away from your victories. It's just a fact. Y'all, Leipold did not say that as some insult or shot at BYU. I don't know why you guys get so bent out of shape. Everyone tells they're an older and more mature team. We're not saying you're putting a bunch of geriatrics out there and yet you're still winning somehow. Props to having an older roster. It's fine. It's cool. It's not they only win because they go off on Mormon missions and come back and they're older and bigger and stuff. That's not the whole. Plus, you're new to the conference. We're going to find more interesting insults than that. It's called soaking. We've heard about it. It's gross. It's weird. It's whatever. We're not going to make fun of the fact that you're like half of your starting offensive line already has 2 kids who are walking. Okay. Like that, it's not what we're going to do. So we'll make fun of the fact you don't have beer, you have ice cream. Although I really do want some of this BYU ice cream. Like the BYU Creamery is, I gotta go. I gotta try some. Okay.
Yeah, now that
I'm
you
sorry.
mentioned that, that kind of sounds awesome.
I'm like, can every school have a school alcohol beverage and a school custom ice cream sundae? Because I would totally have one in the first half and one in the second. I'm kidding. I would have the beer and the ice cream at the same time. I'm a sicko. That's fine. All right, Kansas BYU. Kansas has now started 4-0 in back-to-back seasons for the first time since 1913 to 1915. Y'all, this is fun. And like Kansas was fun. Kansas at one point in the game went up 21-17 in the third quarter. The defense was outscoring the offense like 14-7. And then the Kansas offense finally woke up and ran off with this, and they just overwhelmed BYU. But like Kansas' defense looked spicy. Kansas looked fun. Like BYU just looked like, hey, like BYU played, I thought, fairly well. And it was a tough first game in the Big 12 for BYU. Like Kansas and BYU looked like 2 fun teams. That was a very entertaining game on Saturday that I paid as much attention to as I could with all the different games going on at the same time.
Yeah, I think, going into the weekend, the premier matchup of the Big 12 was probably Kansas State UCF. But Kansas and BYU was a very close second. I mentioned earlier how Cincinnati, they found out that the mistakes of throwing an interception in the team's end zone and missing a field goal, that's going to cost you. Very similar story with BYU. You allow 2 defensive touchdowns. You throw another pick on top of that, and the fact that they were still able to keep that game as close as they did, I think says a lot. So I think there's room for optimism with that loss to Kansas. But again, at this Power 5 level and pretty much any level of college football, you're not going to win many games if you give up 2 touchdowns to an opposing team's defense.
I was at the BYU Arkansas game last weekend and then watched as much of this game as I could. And I'm not sure BYU played significantly worse, really all that much different than they did. Like, I don't think they played that much different against Kansas than they did against Arkansas. Like, I don't think they were that much worse. I just think Kansas is better. Like, I understand Arkansas lost by 3 to LSU. LSU is weird as all get out this year. And like, I think BYU played a good game and Kansas didn't make mistakes in the second half that Arkansas did against BYU. And so I think this is still a good BYU team. I think they're kind of like I thought coming in, like this is going to be a solid team that's going to win. I think they are better than I thought preseason, but it did still feel like a team that's going to win some games because of giving you maturity. Like that's a positive. Also, complaining about people saying you're mature is like an Army coming in and saying like, hey, Army's really disciplined. Like, how dare you say we're disciplined? I can't believe you would say such a thing about the Army. Like it's fine.
Yeah, I guess the alternative is saying, wow, these Cougars are very immature. Like that doesn't sound fun either. So yeah, I think take it as a compliment.
Yeah, I think so. Also, Kansas is just so much fun. And we said this on the Pick Show last week. Like Kansas has the advantage against teams who have not faced this offense before and who have not faced Jalen Daniels. Like, I think Kansas is going to have some more difficulty when they face the teams who have played Jalen Daniels, have seen him, have gone up against him, have played this offense, have gone up against it. Like, I think there will be far more struggles offensively, but like, it's still a ton of fun. God, Kansas is so fun. It's such a weird time to be like, Kansas is a fun and exciting team. Texas is good at football again, and Baylor and Oklahoma State are terrible. Like what a weird, wacky world. And I'm just gonna be honest, like it's kind of fun. It's fun to see something different. Like, sorry, OSU. Like sorry, Parker. Marshall, I know it's not it's not great for the site. Or, my own health and well-being. So let's talk about Oklahoma State and Iowa State, the sicko game of the week that was not. Oklahoma State, Mike Gundy have finally picked a quarterback. They chose Alan Bowman. The guy that everyone thought was going to be the starter before the season. It took 3 games of not sure what was going on to settle on the thing everyone knew and felt was inevitable. So glad we did that. The first quarter of that game, he was not on the same page with the receivers at all. It's almost like he hadn't had enough game reps to form a good rapport with them. A guy who, hadn't actually started a college football game in a very, very long time while he was at Michigan. I mean, Marshall, at this point, I know SU fans are feeling pretty down. They've lost the last 2. I mean, is it fair to say that the whole experiment of the 3 quarterback thing was not only a bad idea, but has completely and totally backfired on them in every way possible?
Yeah, I think there are two major ways. The obvious one is reps. You're splitting reps between guys. You mentioned everything just kind of looked off at the beginning of the game, and then Alan Bowman kind of settles in as it goes. It felt like a guy playing his first full game since 2020 or whatever that last year at Tech was. And then also among the fan base, it kind of provides it made people kind of pick sides. You've got Garrett Rangel guys, you've got Gunnar Gundy guys, you've got Alan Bowman guys, and Alan Bowman goes in and his first pick was pretty ugly. There seemed to be some miscommunication with the receivers. There's two guys standing in one spot. They've got two guys covering them. He throws there anyway. That was pretty ugly. But then with how this quarterback scenario has played out, with nobody really getting enough reps to show that they could be the guy, you've got parts of the fan base on the Rangel side going, well, why don't they just throw Garrett Rangel in there? We've got people who like Gunnar Gundy scrambling ability saying, well, we'll put Gunnar in there. So I think that it not only hampered them in terms of building some cohesion with this group that the talk of the offseason was how many guys they lost to the transfer portal, but it also kind of divided the fan base in some ways in that everybody kind of picked their champion. And if one guy's not playing particularly well because he hasn't had a lot of reps, then the fan base is going to be calling for the next guy. So it's a really weird spot to be in. You kind of mentioned Alan Bowman's the guy that everybody thought whenever he committed to Oklahoma State that he was going to be the guy. I likened it in my 10 thoughts after the game that it's like whenever OSU hits a big shot going into halftime that ties a basketball game, maybe against Kansas or something, and Larry Reese says 20 minutes played and we've gone nowhere. So that kind of feels like 3 non-conference games played, and Oklahoma State has essentially right back to where everybody thought they'd be at the beginning of the year. So it's kind of just a nightmare. I think it's good to cut losses. Gundy said after the game he's not committed, or not at least publicly committed, to saying Bowman's going to be the guy going forward, which I guess I don't know. But yeah, it's just a really weird spot to be in, and a lot of it just because everybody thought that Alan Bowman was going to be the guy going into the year. A lot of it seems kind of unnecessary.
I mean, yeah, I guess you keep losing. It makes sense that you switch to somebody else younger who in theory would be the guy moving forward to prepare for the future, especially if the Gundy bowl streak, which kind of feels like it's going to come to an end this year, actually does. I want to talk Iowa State in a minute, but Marshall, since we have you as a guest, we got to talk about this. We got to talk about Pokes with a Purpose. That is the OSU NIL collective. They had to put out a formal statement on Twitter on Friday to deal with, quote, an incredible amount of disinformation spewing on social media and message boards about Oklahoma State's NIL. I'm going to read the last paragraph in this statement because it is interesting. The importance of NIL. NIL is here to stay, whether we like it or not. Interesting choice of words. Ask any athlete and they'll tell you NIL is as important to them as facilities, campus, or culture. I would argue that it means more than those three things to some players. Many players, successful programs, including their donors, fans, coaches, and athletes, must embrace NIL to remain competitive, retain athletes, and recruit new athletes. OSU is no different. It's the world we live in now. Adapt or die. NIL collectives and school athletic departments are supposed to kind of have a certain amount of distance between them. The reality, most of them are working fairly closely together. This doesn't feel like the best kind of thing that your NIL collective should have to be posting on social media, especially in light of comments that have been made by Gundy. I mean, for a while, and including over the last few weeks, about the importance of NIL and how he feels about it. I just with the way the season's going and things like this, I'm kind of struggling as an Oklahoma State fan to find a lot of optimism in the state of the program right now.
Yeah, and it's kind of like the chicken or the egg. Is the NIL going to have an uptick because the football team is doing well, or are people going to be upset that the football team's not doing well, so they're going to say, "Well, I'm not going to donate to NIL because they're not using it properly." So I don't know. Everybody that I've ran into with Folks with a Purpose has been great. They've been very helpful. So it's just a weird spot to be in that you get this release, days after Mike Gundy mentions how, South Alabama players don't have a lot of NIL down there. They're just there to play football. So it feels like mixed messaging coming out of you mentioned that they're supposed to be separate, but I think in reality things would be a lot better um, if everybody can kind of get on the same page as far as that goes. And it's kind of on top of the weirdness that has been this football season with the three quarterbacks and all that. Your main collective releasing a statement is certainly just kind of adds to the bizarre couple of months that it's been so far.
By the way, South Alabama does have an NIL collective. They're not just down there playing football for the love of the game, Mike Gundy. And just so you're aware. As for Iowa State did get this win. Iowa State decided to come out and be an air raid offense, something we hadn't seen through 3 weeks. Maybe 1 year, sometime down the line, far in the future, Matt Campbell will care enough about the non-conference to actually play it to win. Seriously, where has that been? Where has that passing attack been? Where has that Rocco Becht offensive passing attack been? Like, it wasn't just that he was good on Saturday. Like, they were scheming pass catchers open. And maybe that's more credit to Oklahoma State's defense and less credit to Iowa State. I'm not sure, but it sure seemed like a combination of Rocco Becht looking great and an offensive game plan that was very, very successful.
Yeah, they really went after Cameron Epps, who was making his first start in place of an absent Lyric Rawls. And that, that's the kind of scheming that, obviously makes a lot of sense. You notice the starter's not going to be there, then let's throw at that guy. But yeah, it was crazy. Jalen Well had a career high before halftime in receiving yards. And with how suspect Iowa State's offense has been, going into that game, that was certainly not a stat that I had marked on my board. And Rocco Becht looked. I was talking with McLean Baxley, Oklahoma State's 247 guy, and we were kind of just like in awe of Becht managing the pocket and running around and finding an open guy. And McLean likened him to Matt Saracen of Friday Night Lights fame. That you can win with a Matt Saracen, maybe more than you can with a JD McCoy. So it was, that's not the game that I expected that I was going to show up to. I expected maybe them to send two delegates out to midfield and then just kind of hand the ball back and forth to each other until overtime and maybe do some weird, penalty kick scenario. But that's the game we got, and Iowa State looks like an actual football team on Saturday.
I'll be very interested to see what they do this week. By the way, shout out to Brent Bloom for this one. This is only the third time in the last 20 years Iowa State has started 1-0 in Big 12 play. The others were 2020, the COVID season, and 2015. That is wild. A couple of scores to hit to real quick. The final non-conference games for the Big 12, TCU 34, SMU 17. Solid outing from TCU, whose defense has looked a lot better since their Week 1 performance against Colorado, as Marshall noted, looking a lot better than they did Week 1. Offense continues to play well. Houston 38, Sam Houston 7. Houston gets to keep their name. Congratulations on being the best Houston in the state of Texas to play football. I've paid attention to Dana Holgorsen coach teams long enough not to buy into a sign of positivity too much, but I will give Houston the win and the credit of enjoying a 38-point offensive output. It's nice to feel like your team can put up points and win and play some defense. I thought that was really good. Let's see what Houston does next week when they're not playing a team that just moved up from FCS to FBS. All right, last Big 12 time we got a hit. In this one, Kansas State over UCF. Now, this looked like it'd be the best game of the weekend. I think it certainly almost lived up to that. I think it was very good. Kansas State punted once the entire game. I'm going to repeat that for you. Kansas State punted one time in this entire game. Now, listen. There was a turnover and downs, there was a missed field goal, and there was an interception in the first half that were wins for UCS defense. But Kansas State scored on all 4 second-half drives, and the other ones were like you made a big play to get the offense off the field. Otherwise, they punted once. So there was one traditional, like, we stopped the offense. Otherwise, it took to miss field goal, a turnover on downs, or an interception. It's a little bit of a disappointing performance from the UCF defense in my book. What's wild about this game is UCF took a 24-21 lead out of the half, and then Kansas State ran away with it, building up a score of 44-24. UCF scored a touchdown with 3 seconds left to make the final score look better. Like, it was a competitive first half and a drive for UCF, and then Kansas State blew the doors off UCF. Like, I saw some UCF account, and I don't remember who it was. Like, if this and 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 this had gone different, UCF would have won this game. And I was like, yeah. That's a fairly good long bullet list of scenarios in which case UCF might not have actually only lost by a 2-score, even though it was closer to a 3-score game. I think Kansas State coming off the loss to Missouri, it's kind of like, it reminds me of last year. Weird game. You lose a game you weren't expected to, come out and then look really good moving forward. I kind of feel like Will Howard looked very good. The passing attack looked good. Like I feel like this is a Kansas State team that is still very similar to last year. Like they're probably going to have a loss. They've got a loss. They're probably going to lose another game somewhere. Maybe it's Texas. Maybe they lose another one. But this is why I still think Kansas State is the Big 12's best shot of knocking out Oklahoma from Arlington.
Yeah, absolutely. DJ Giddens is better than I expected him to be.
Oh, man, goodness. Especially with no Trayshawn Ward. Like, to put up that performance, goodness.
Yeah, gets the ball 30 carries, 207 yards, 4 touchdowns, and then is also Kansas State's leading receiver with 8 receptions and 86 yards. So, last season, J.R. Giddens ran for 518 yards. He's already up to 423. 4 games into this year. So yeah, it kind of feels like one of those K-State teams that is just kind of consistently going to, like a snowball, just kind of build and build throughout the year. Obviously that loss to Missouri is, painful and it's going to stink, but yeah, with a hobbled Will Howard, to be able to do what they did to UCF is very impressive. Obviously UCF doesn't have John Rice Plumlee, but I don't think John Rice Plumlee is going to play safety anytime soon. So, you can't, not many games that you give up 44 points are you going to, are things going to change. So, I think it was, a somewhat respectable showing considering no John Rice Plumlee. That UCF goes to Manhattan in its first Big 12 game and puts up 31 points and at least somewhat looks respectable. But as you mentioned, one of those touchdowns comes very late. But yeah, defensively, it seems like the Knights have some things to work out.
I will say this: the Kansas State secondary made me a little bit curious after their performance against Missouri. I'm not gonna say that I feel better after the Saturday's performance against UCF. Like, Tim McLean is fine. He still went 14 for 24 for 264 and 3 touchdowns. Yes, he had an interception, but I'm still a little bit nervous about Kansas State's secondary against a really good passing attack and a really good quarterback. Like, Tim McLean is not that. Missouri's passing attack looked pretty good, and it's subpar, mediocre. Like, once Kansas State has to go and face, like, let's go through the schedule here real quick because I don't have it in front of me. I don't remember what it is. Hold on. You go to OSU, you get a week off, you go to OSU, you go to Texas Tech. Then you get TCU. Like, I'm curious what TCU looks like. I'm curious what Texas looks like. Jalen Daniel, the Sunflower Showdown is in Lawrence this year. Like, Kansas State fans are like, we've won it 100 years in a row. I know. I will be very curious what happens when they face what is expected to be a good passing attack in the Big 12, how that secondary will hold up, and if we don't just end up with an old-fashioned Big 12 shootout involving Kansas State.
I'm a little worried. Sorry that I'm totally throwing this off topic now. I'm a little worried I said J.R. Giddens, which would be blasphemy if I did, because that's a Kansas basketball player. I'm an Oklahoma guy, K-State fans. If I did, I'm sorry. I meant DJ Giddens. I'm sorry. J.R. Giddens went to school at John Marshall in Oklahoma City. I'm sorry if that's what I said. I honestly don't remember.
It's been a very long weekend for you. You had to drive all the way back from Ames, Iowa to hop on a podcast with me tonight. So if everyone be nice to Marshall, he's doing his best. Okay. We were supposed to have 2 guests tonight. We have 1. So Marshall's having to do a lot of heavy lifting with me. Okay. So let's wrap up this show the way we do every single Monday. Let's look to the weekend ahead and kind of pick the game that we have circled as potentially the best one of the weekend. There are 6 games this week and 1 on Friday. Kansas State and Oklahoma State are off. So you get Cincinnati at BYU on Friday night with a 9:15 p.m. kickoff. Hello, Big 12 After Dark. On Saturday, this is well, no, that actually works out pretty good. Kansas at Texas for 2:30 on ABC. Houston at Texas Tech and Baylor at UCF also at that time. Those will be football games that will also be played. Iowa State at Oklahoma at 6 o'clock on FS1. West Virginia at TCU at 7 o'clock on ESPN2. I mean, there's a game. So, Marshall, I'll let you go first. What's the game you're most looking forward to in the Big 12 this weekend?
Okay, well, it's obviously Kansas State or Kansas and Texas. But I'm a bit of a sicko. I forgot what the game was on week 1, but I watched Tulsa play Arkansas Pine Bluff. So I'm kind of looking forward to Cincinnati BYU, if I'm honest. Which team's going to, stake their claim as the first, newcomer to get a Big 12 win. I'm kind of looking forward to that. I thought Cincinnati, like I mentioned earlier, made some mistakes to not be closer to OU than maybe they should have been. And obviously BYU gives up 2 defensive touchdowns to Kansas this past week. So I'm sort of looking forward to that. But yeah, obviously it's Kansas and Texas. You know, if Texas can somehow lose to Kansas in football again, I think all will be right with the world for just a little bit.
I mean, Taylor Swift's apparently dating Travis Kelce. I'm not sure. I believe it's not just a PR stunt, but whatever. But so like crazier things have happened than Kansas beating Texas in football. Yeah, I mean that's the game. I'm not like the fear is that it's not actually a competitive game because Texas' defense is so good.
Yeah.
Cincinnati BYU should be interesting. One of those teams is going to get their first win. I mean, I'm going to pick UCF to beat Baylor in Orlando. So UCF gets their first Big 12 win.
Yep.
I am intrigued to some extent by Iowa State, Oklahoma.
Okay.
This is a series of games that have been fairly competitive with Matt Campbell in Ames. I know it's in Norman. Iowa State can't run the ball. They cannot run the ball. So they're going to be one-dimensional, and I think Oklahoma's secondary is better than Oklahoma State's. But I am curious what Oklahoma's offense looked like against the best defense they will have faced so far this year in Iowa State. Again, it's in Norman. It's not in Ames. I wish this game was in Ames just because it would be even more interesting. But I will be very curious to see what this Oklahoma offense does. We saw it against SMU. It took a while to pull away. We saw against Cincinnati. It did fine. What happens at home against the best defense I think they will have faced thus far into the season? Can Iowa State's offense do enough to allow the defense to keep this game interesting? Or will Iowa State's offense look more like it did the first 3 weeks of the season, specifically against Iowa and Ohio, and be so ineffective that it doesn't matter what the defense does, Oklahoma's still going to pull away for a double-digit win? I'm very curious what this game looks like, because I think it will tell us more about Oklahoma than it will about Iowa State.
Yeah, and another kind of sneaky, interesting game is Donovan Smith, going back to Lubbock, playing against Texas Tech, and it's just not a normal Texas Tech. It's a, backup quarterback. It's Baron Morton, Texas Tech. So we both, don't think Houston is great. I think Texas Tech should probably win this game regardless of who's starting at quarterback. But there's a built-in storyline there that I'm at least intrigued to see how it plays out.
Yeah, I thank you for reminding me of a game that I had circled as like, this one's going to be awesome when we get to this point in the schedule, and yet 2-2 Houston has a better record than 1-3 Texas Tech. Also, like, this is a game Texas Tech should win, is what I've said for 2 of the losses Texas Tech now has on their schedule. So who knows what Texas Tech should and shouldn't do this season. Marshall, I really appreciate your time, man. I know you've had a very busy weekend, and you're going to continue to have maybe a little bit of an off week since OSU's off this weekend. The team takes a bit of a break. Maybe you can as well.
Well, my cousin decided that he was going to get married during football season, and I was like, sweet. I have a built-in excuse. I've got to work. And expertly, he picked the bye week. So I'm actually driving down to Broken Bow this weekend. But me and the wife are figuring out a way to kind of make it a mini vacation. And if my cousin somehow listens to this, I'm very excited for you. I'm very happy to be at this wedding. It's just I would enjoy some time.
Marshall, I would hope that you tell your cousin to listen to this podcast. We appreciate everybody who listens to the 10-12 podcast. Make sure that you are, especially if you're an Oklahoma State fan and are still listening to podcasts that talk about Oklahoma State and aren't so just depressed that you still want to be able to do that, make sure if you are, of course, are visiting Pistols Firing Blog, one of the best independent sites covering any Big 12 team, any college athletic team, period. You do a great job, Marshall. So go check out Pistols Firing Blog. Whether you're an OSU fan or not, it is worth the read. Of course, 1012network.com, TEN, the number 12, the word network, is where you can find every single podcast in the network. You know what? We've got an Oklahoma State show. If you're an OSU fan, you know about Feels Like 45. You know Cade and Dustin. They do an incredible job. And you'll find every show there. Follow us on Twitter at 1012network. Follow us. That's also the one on Blue Sky. If you want to find us on Instagram or Threads, it's 1012pod. 1012 podcast on YouTube. Yes, we will have our special teams review show for this week. I've got a fun guest. I've got a very interesting conversation I think we're going to have regarding Iowa State punting and Oklahoma State special teams. We're going to have something good about Oklahoma State to talk about. Their special teams are still really, really good, so that's positive. We will make sure you check all of that out. We will be back on Thursday with picks. We will talk to you all again then.